Hello and welcome to Monday Morning Mooks. I'm Pete.
And I'm Mike.
And this is where the magic happens in the Mook Studios. Today we are here to talk to you about something that we referenced in a recent episode called the God bullshit. Now, I think I'll begin with the introduction here. The God bullshit, in its most basic definition, has nothing to do with the use of a religious symbolism in games, be it from an outside religion or within the game's own mythology. It has gotten the name the God bullshit because it is often tied to religious examples, but it doesn't inherently involve that. The basic definition of God bullshit is a gaffe in plotting and story structure in which the stakes and terms of the primary conflict shift so rapidly that it loses any emotional connection with the audience. And we talked about this briefly in our one episode with the promise that we'd get a little bit more into it because it's kind of a complex subject here.
Yep. All right. Well, I think you want to start off because I think you have a pretty good example of the God bullshit.
The God bullshit. Well, I think since we mentioned it in Xenoblade Chronicle, let's go ahead and start with the archetypal bit of God bullshit. That is Xenogears. Mm-hmm. Now, Xenogears, as many of you know, is a classic RPG that started really well and ended really badly, and I maintain a large part of that is the God bullshit problem. Mm-hmm. This comes from, I think this is just a classic example of the stakes shifting too rapidly. It goes from sort of this weird, almost stock, but at the time it was still a little bit of original idea that you have like the ground dwellers and the sky dwellers. Mm-hmm. And then in Disc 2, it turns out that all matter and life on Earth is being merged into one giant gun that is a computer that's God, but it's also a spaceship that collided with God, but it's a gun to kill God. And it's all those things. And that is the plot to Xenogears. Mike, is that being fair before I move on to why this counts as God bullshit?
Yeah, that's fairly, that's pretty fair. I don't think anybody is going to go and say, oh no, Xenogears, it's totally like, it's your, stereotypical, buddy action film.
Yeah, it's got your classic 3-act Sidfield structure. No, it doesn't. Okay, and this is why this is a problem, and I think it's great because, I sort of jokingly described, even though I was completely accurate, the end plot to Xenogears, but it's not complexity that makes something God bullshit, and the reason why I like to start this conversation with Xenogears is because they have a really complex and well-done villain that isn't God bullshit at all in Graph. And this is a character that he's simultaneously 3 different people. He's jumping and reincarnating all the time. But the thing that makes that not God bullshit, and I think defining what God bullshit isn't helps to define what it is that it never leaves the parameters of what was set. Like, everything still works the same way within the story. It never really leaves that. It's like they introduce reincarnation right away, and the way that works stays fairly consistent. Mm-hmm. The nature of his abilities and the things he's capable of doing and what is at stake with him never really fundamentally shifts. Like, it gets bigger, but it never fundamentally shifts. And the exact opposite of this is Krellian, the other main villain, who everything about him fundamentally shifts in the nature of the conflict. Like, in the end, spoilers, this is all spoilers because we're talking about plotting here. So every game we mention is spoilers. Krellian, everything about him shifts. He was like based in nanotechnology, but then he becomes like a star child riding a wave off of an exploded god to reach the source of all life. And like, what's at stake totally changes. You have no idea what's going on with that. Why did he become a giant sphinx snake? The terms of the battle totally changes. What were they exactly? And that were they souls? What? Everything shifts so rapidly that I did not care about how that game ended. I just wanted it to end.
All right, here's my rebuttal about your very wrong opinion. No, I agree with most of what you have to say, and I think that a lot of the issues with Xenogears had more to do with just the fact that the second disc sort of sucked, more so than necessarily where they were going with it. I do feel like they had something interesting they were going for. Maybe even if the second disc didn't suck, it might not have been perfect, but I wouldn't go as far to say, hey, that's God bullshit. I think the issue with Krellian is you had this character who was, unlike Graf and everybody else, he was not part of that whole animus collective. He wasn't like the Emperor who was, living forever. He wasn't like the Gazelle.
And I gotta tell you, that felt like some of that felt so ass random that I would also put it in the God bullshit, just because you're like, what does this mean? what is the purpose of it? How does this affect me, the player?
Well, I mean, let's remember who Faye is. Faye is the first child.
I don't know what that means either. I played that game fucking religiously. I have no idea what half that crap means. Like, I know what it means in the bullshit, like, expanded universe explanation that you're about to give me that I've already read, but I don't know what it means as a player. You see, as someone who's emotionally invested in what is happening to this character and how his relationships are with other characters, give this the benefit of the doubt. I understand that Ellie is the primary love interest, and she's so bland that I wanted her to die from, like, the first 10 minutes. But assuming that was good, I would be, like, emotionally invested in what was going on, and then fucking words.
Look. In Ellie's defense, she was a speed freak.
How did that make her bland? No, we're going off topic. If we talk about how okay, a different video and a different topic is how poorly female characters are written in general.
Okay, fair enough.
All right.
But to get back on topic, you did have, throughout the game, they kept either through illusions or through flashbacks or through other, maybe not perfect imagery, but through other imagery, you saw all the past lives of, Ellie, Faye, and the rest of the animus collective, thing you got going on. And I felt that the point was that it was building up to this sort of climax. That you had this character like Krellian, who he did not fit into that. He was somebody who had to, through his own will and his, like, using technology, make himself live forever so that he could accomplish his goals. His goals were killing God, but he still had clear set goals.
By becoming a female sphinx snake giant monster?
Look, I think you're confusing design with plot.
Okay, no, and this is where we get into the God bullshit. Explain to me this. As a fan of Xenogears, explain to me this. What was that about? What two things were fighting in that last battle? Mm-hmm. What was at stake? And what was going on? These are things that you need to intrinsically know to have an emotional connection with the plot.
Oh, yeah. Like, from at least my understanding, it's been a while since I played the game, I'm pretty sure the whole Krellian thing was going to destroy the universe.
How did you get that? I thought he was trying to become one with God, and you're just being a dick about it.
Well, no, but the whole becoming one with God involved everything merging into one and it destroying everything else.
Really? I played this game recently. I didn't get any of that.
Oh man,
all right. You know what? I think that at least, even if you don't agree, makes the point. I'd like to move on to something else within Xenogears, which is because it also has an example of God bullshit in mechanics, where the actual elements of the game shift so rapidly that you lose an emotional connection with it. And I think this is an important one too.
Okay.
You got. And this happened in the second disc. The whole first disc, I think, at least part of the game, part of the game's core appeal was trying to create this big world, right, with all these things. Even though most of it was D-block, this big world with all these things going on and, like, real interest in it. And then, and this is sort of the story God bullshit combining with the mechanical God bullshit. because everything was merging into the giant god-killing gun that's also God, half of the areas that you thought existed that you're willing to explore, by the time they open up the whole world to it and you could fly around and do stuff, is gone. You can't even access it. And it's like all these things that they like introduced you to and made you interested in and maybe made you care about with the scenery and going in and doing stuff is just not there once you could go back to it. And you know, you don't see how it's destroyed, you don't have any connection, just gone.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, that's just, you know, the second disc in general. I mean, there was a lot of issues.
There were a lot of issues, and we could go back and forth as to why, budget cutbacks, whatever. Yeah. But that's still, we're trying to explain God bullshit. That's God bullshit on a mechanical level. Same thing with System Id. That was the God bullshit. Like, all the battle mechanics were built around, like, you have a percentage chance of gaining a power level when you do an attack, and then you get up to 3, and then you could do super stuff, or, you know, 2, whatever. And then in the second disc, it's like, boom, all that stuff that we introduced to you, all that stuff that we showed you, the game's internal logic, now you just hit this button. and that is also mechanical God bullshit.
Yeah, but let's also remember, though, that, like, System Id was not a huge part of the game at all.
Yeah, but like it was, you needed it for all the bosses after you got introduced to System Id. You needed to use it, and it totally defeated. It totally shifted the parameters of how a fight works and how you get good at the combat in the game. And I think that's a big part of it. Like it's a plot error. We attribute it to as a plot error, but for games it could also be a mechanical error. Or in the case of Final Fantasy VIII, it's all of those things. I think we do this more or less unscripted, but we tried to shoot this earlier and we screwed up like 10 minutes in, so now we're doing it again. And we didn't think about Final Fantasy VIII at all, and then when we brought it up, we're like, oh shit, that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Everything about Final Fantasy VIII is God bullshit. Everything switches rapidly. Nothing makes any fucking sense. It's like, and there's no way to understand what's at stake. Mm-hmm. It's like time is collapsing on itself.
Yeah, there's this whole merging thing. There's these witches. Nobody gives a shit about the witches. Like, you're a ridiculously whiny character.
Well, okay, but that's bad character design. I'm talking about the God bullshit.
Well, the God bullshit, you know, is part of the bad character.
Of it, yeah, but like, seriously, what exactly was at stake? If time merges, then what happens?
Bad stuff, monsters. I remember there was like, you know, yes, Japan has this problem with maybe just correctly describing.
Well, no, well, here's the thing, though, and I think this is an inherent problem with any of the universes about to be destroyed, or not even the universe. The universe you could sort of like encapsulate. Any like reality is about to be destroyed kind of storyline. I think that there are so many easy ways to diverge in the God bullshit, because what is the fabric of reality? How do you destroy it? How do you fix it? But you
ever watch a Star Trek episode?
Yeah, and they couldn't agree from episode to episode how that worked. Those were always the worst episodes, except for City on the Edge of Forever, which basically used the same time travel mechanics as Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Fair enough. I mean, I'll give you Final Fantasy VIII. I mean, that game, you know, very much... And that I'll give you is most of the God bullshit that I at least have an issue with is the last boss that you kind of maybe heard a reference about somewhere else in the game, and then just pops up at the very end. It's like, haha, guys, yeah, you really have to fight me. And yes, you can describe it a little bit better as the, you know, some sort of concept. You're all of a sudden you go from fighting an actual enemy.
It's fucking like a concept. Yeah, and Final Fantasy IX did that too. Final Fantasy IX did even more out of the blue.
Yeah.
But like again, whenever you introduce an enemy as a concept, when you were fighting physical enemies, it's like, well, how do I defeat the concept of death or man wanting to destroy itself? Well, you stab it and you set it on fire. Well, then why can't it just be a bad guy? Well, okay, classic example of crap done right. Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah.
We're even staying within the Final Fantasy franchise. There was a time that they did it without any god bullshit. Because in the beginning, magic is a force of nature that when harnessed blows shit up.
Yeah.
And at the end of the game, magic is a force of nature that when harnessed blows more shit up because the stakes have risen, but it's still within, you still understand what's going on.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'll give you that. I mean, Final Fantasy IX, I think that was my biggest problem with it. I don't think it was like the greatest game of all time, but I thought it was a pretty solid game. You know, good battle system, interesting story. I mean, it didn't, for the most part, I would say most of the time, it knew what it was trying to be. It was trying to be fairly tongue-in-cheek, and then it kind of got a little bit more serious towards the end, but was still fairly tongue-in-cheek. At no point did it get overly serious until the, whatever that guy's name was.
I don't even remember. And if you ever want an example of why God bullshit is bad, and I think this was something we just thoroughly agreed on, every time there's a character who's brought in as, God bullshit, like that, last enemy out of nowhere that was only kind of referenced, the, fighting a concept, or, just the terms of the battle changing. Were any of those good characters? Did you really like Krellian's Snake Sphinx female form? That might not even have been Krellian.
No.
Or, were those good characters? No. They were not compelling.
No, fair enough. I'll give you that. I mean, I liked Krellian as a character, up until that point.
Up until his batshit plan that makes no sense came into play.
Well, here's the thing. Even if he had the batshit plan, I didn't mind that as much as when it actually got implemented.
Yeah, when it happened, that was the
okay. Fair enough.
Because that's God bullshit.
Because Krellian himself, he did fit into the plot. You had this character who was also in love with Ellie, but unlike Graf, didn't have that animus powers that allowed him to essentially sell his soul to give himself just pure hate or whatever it was.
I gotta say, I'm still not terribly sure exactly how that worked, but it still wasn't so far off that I felt like I was shaken from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, they kind of did give that explanation that, hey, Faye is this character that keeps getting reborn, and the issue is that Graf was just the quintessential, I guess, his hatred. And he kind of sold the rest of his physical body, and his physical body was reborn again. But whatever.
Yeah, but whatever. We're talking too much about Xenogears. I think there was one that we both talked about before this that I think is just this was. Why? Because I say God bullshit's always a bad thing. Very rarely am I going to say anything's always a bad thing. There tends to be a classy way to do any of it. And this was what convinced me God bullshit was a bad thing. Because they tried to class it up. They tried so hard to class this up. They did everything they could to make it right, and it still didn't work. And that was the last boss in Earthbound.
Yeah.
You had Gigas, and it was a thing. You didn't fully understand what was going on, but they tried to implement it in such a way that it was part of it. They had a lot of build up to this thing that didn't quite physically exist, and you couldn't actually damage it. So they were trying to make it not you just hit it with a bat, even though it's something that doesn't physically exist in a tangible way. They had you cannot comprehend its attacks. So they were trying to mechanically make it they were trying to integrate both plot and mechanics to make it so you were sort of not totally shaken off. But I mean, I still was what was that? All the power build up and your understanding for how the combat works. Well, that doesn't fly for the very last fight. And the even what exactly you were fighting and what was at stake. These were all things that it's you still don't have any emotional connection to it. It was a great game that you wanted to beat, but did you really feel what was going on with that boss?
I see what you're saying, at least as far as mechanics-wise goes.
Well, the prayer thing was just bullshit.
Well, no, I like the prayer thing. I like the prayer thing because it also involved it became a very defensive battle. The issue was, unless you knew that was what you were supposed to do, you were going to die a couple of times in that battle until you went, oh, wait, it keeps saying...
Well, yeah, but like that, they never... That's a departure. That is a complete departure from... The game teaches you, through playing it, how stuff works. And then for the very last battle, and only the last battle, they completely shift the rules on you. So it's not even really an engaging battle, at least not when you're first experiencing it, because you're like, what the fuck's going on? This doesn't operate under the same rules. It suddenly changes everything. It didn't introduce you to any of those concepts beforehand. It's essentially a different game for one fight. And I consider that quintessential mechanical god bullshit.
I mean, prayer in the games was a useful tactic. They just changed what prayer does in the last fight.
Yeah, they changed what it did. They changed what they shifted the goals, the nature of the conflict.
Well, I don't think they changed the nature of the conflict. The conflict was still there. You had to beat this guy.
Yeah, but okay, not the nature so much as the terms. Like, what exactly was going on? The terms, the act of what was going on, how forces were conflicting, what you did, how that affected what was going on, fundamentally changes for exactly one fight and then never again.
Yeah, I'm willing to forgive it a little bit because of the fact that it does change the mechanics a little bit. The fact that, you do have to do something different than just hit it with a bat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but like, okay, I said that this was the classiest way you could do it. I still think it's worse for it. Am I wrong? I think it's worse for that last fight.
I think they could have done it a little bit better to help compel you to take those actions, as opposed to like just sort of changing it. You sort of just have to fight it a couple of times and realize, oh wait, I should start doing this.
Well, I'll ask you, when you play that boss, do you feel it? Because that's what it, like, when you talk about challenge level, playing game, like, and this is what when something uses the mechanics that you have been learning throughout the game in a way that is either challenging or creative, but within the same rules, i.e. not God bullshit, you feel it. There's a visceral feeling of success. Did anyone feel it when they hit prayer a couple of times after reading the strategy guide?
Okay, I'll give you that. But I'll also say that that's not, purely a factor in just JRPGs. There's many games like, DMC4, where the last boss was, these hands trying to pound you, and, all of a sudden the crazy stylized action totally changed the terms.
Boom, I got you. I got your ass, because that's not what happened in DMC4.
Okay.
First time you meet that boss, they introduce you to the idea of having to catch his hands. Also, if you paid attention, even though you don't have to do this, there are openings with literally every boss in that game to catch and return their attacks. And they use the same mechanics, they just slowly up the stakes on it until in the very last boss, where that's what you have to do. So that is an example of how a seemingly different battle still creatively uses the stakes that you learned throughout the game.
Well, fuck you.
Nero is still a cunt.
Yes.
I'm not saying that he was a good character. I'm saying that the mechanical design of those fights was good.
Okay.
I'll defend DMC4 to the death. I think the only game that makes DMC4 look bad is DMC3, because that was the best in the series. But yeah, so God bullshit doesn't really creep up in non-RPG games. Like,
I'm trying to think of a few. There's a few that I feel like do that, just maybe not to the extent that God bullshit does.
Well, I mean, does that really creep up? Because I feel like there are. Maybe I'm just blanking. I feel like there are some. Story God bullshit tends to be just in the realm of the JRPG. Not necessarily JRPG. There are American RPGs that do it too, but it tends to be an RPG-centric thing when plotline-wise the terms just completely change. I mean, you're not playing Call of Duty and then suddenly the last boss is, again. Actually, you do that in Spec Ops.
Yeah, look.
But Spec Ops is a little different. The whole thing is kind of surreal. It's done on purpose. I don't think it's that bad in Spec Ops, but I guess for like most conventional shooters, you don't really have that happen story-wise. But I feel like mechanically, there are some times where just like all the mechanics, like the nature of what you're trying to do, suddenly shifts for maybe one fight and then never again.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, no,
because like I could think of a couple of games where like there's a guy that you can just shoot him, but like if you just sit there and don't do anything, you get a better response. But like in all the games that I could think of like that, they introduce you to the idea for a while that like you don't have to do this.
Well, yeah, and I guess to go back onto the whole mechanical god bullshit.
Yeah.
I will say the Call of Duty games do that a lot.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. The last boss in essentially every single fight becomes a last, like, you have to shoot the guy when you're, like, really dazed, or it becomes a QTE. Where all of a sudden...
you're absolutely right. I just wasn't thinking of that.
Yeah, where all of a sudden all the battles comes down to tapping A. Okay, come on.
Yeah, and that's something that they never freaking did before that moment, especially in Modern Warfare. That was just like that happened. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So that is an example of mechanical god.
And I will say that like even when you get, because I played 3 recently, and when you finally defeat the last boss, it didn't feel as visceral as the trudging through and shooting and throwing grenades and all this stuff. When it comes to, like, finally it's like, okay, I need to, I play on the PC. Oh, you need to click the mouse. Now I need to hit this button. I need to hit space a bunch of times. I need to, hit this. Yeah. Why?
Yeah, it did it. And I think QTEs are probably the best example. I'm glad you brought that up. QTEs are probably the best example of mechanical god bullshit that happen all the time. Because I could think of... When I talked to you, the first time I mentioned QTEs to you, we said it was great because there's only one game in the world that uses QTEs and the game is better for it.
Yeah.
Like, some games are worse because they have QTEs, and some games are no better or worse because the QTEs don't really affect it. But there was only one game in the world we could think of, and we sat down for a long time trying to figure this out. There was one game we could think of that was better because of QTEs, but I'm going to say there are actually 2. There was one we didn't think of.
Oh, okay.
Now, the first one, we're actually doing a whole other video on their use of QTEs, so we're not going to mention that now because we don't want to spoil it. But the second one, Bayonetta.
Okay. Yeah.
Bayonetta used QTEs in a way that was consistent throughout and fit within the way it worked.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so that was also... Bayonetta was the example when we were trying to think of a really well-designed main character from a modern game. So
yeah.
I think... Anytime that we're trying to think of the exception to the rule that was good, we should probably just think was that in Bayonetta?
Yeah.
Because if it was, then it was good.
Yeah.
All right, but I think so. Hopefully, that has expanded your understanding of something that we're probably going to be referring to again: God bullshit.
I will say one thing though. We'll leave it for the next video because I know you haven't played the game. However, I will say that I think Mother 3...
You son of a bitch. I never played this game.
Yeah, I know.
I can't intelligently...
Yeah, I know you can't intelligently... Which is exactly why I'm just going to leave it at... Perhaps you should play the game, and we'll get back to it at another time and have a discussion of whether or not that was God bullshit.
Okay. So this video has ended in a cliffhanger. From the Monday Morning Mooks, I'm Pete.
And I'm Mike.
See you around.